One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslik.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio, another session, another week. As always, James, Osborne, and myself hosting this session today. And James, it's a bit of a sort of a hot in Europe, if I understand. It's pretty much the hot where I am in Japan as well. The question is, how are we adapting to this? I mean, mitigation seems to be out of the game, so it's all about adaptation. How are you coping with this in Milano?
Yeah, it's hello, Sasja. Good to hear you again. Welcome to everyone who's joining us again. Yeah, I always kind of hate it that we only talk about these things just when the temperature goes over a certain limit, and we kind of know it's kind of predictable, but then when it actually hits you, everyone starts talking about it.
Yeah.
Last month we didn't know it was going to be hot again, and even hotter than previous years. Every year it's getting hotter and hotter. No, in Italy, where I'm talking to you from, interesting that that, and also in many other parts of the northern hemisphere, there's these heat domes that build. And across large parts of Western Europe, it's been very hot in Spain as well, in Italy, and the local regional governments here have taken action, banning outdoor work during the hottest hours on days that are labelled by the health ministry as red alert days because of the excessive heat. There's no outdoor working from midday till 4, so in the hottest part of the day. If you work in roadworks, construction, quarries, agriculture, horticulture, and all of those kind of outdoor sectors, which is huge. I mean, I don't know how many people work
are employed in that sector in Italy. Yeah, it's a huge.
And you have to find a way to make sure that they're not outdoors on these red alert days. So it has a serious economic health and economic social. A worker died of a heart attack and heat stroke. People falling victim to it. I know that's just one or two small examples from one smallish country, multiplied around the world. I mean, it's pretty hot where you are as well, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's humid as as hell, to be honest, because it's very. I mean, compared to the dry sort of a heat, the humid heat, it's a quite annoying after some time. It gets your brain sort of to just stick away in this sort of a almost a sauna-like environment. It is, as many people would say, what it is. What is interesting, James, I was having I posted some of these things about the dome, the heat dome, and what's going on in the world and heat related stuff. And I got one of the comments was very interesting. The guy from the US, whoever he is and from, doesn't matter. He just wrote to me, it's just summer, just cope with it. And I was thinking like, but summers, as I remember them and generations before me, would not be the summers where temperature go about 40 Celsius in parts of the Europe. I mean, this is not really the summer as we know it. I mean, what's the answer to these kind of things, James? I was thinking what exactly to answer, to go into the deeper discussion about the science or just ignore that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, fight back against them. No, it's the classic climate denier technique of just saying, well, it's all weather and weather goes up and down and it's hot and cold and there's always been, and this is nothing, nothing different. When in fact, I think the main argument is not talking about whether it's hot or not, but talking about the number of people who are affected and afflicted by this heat, who die, increased hospitalization. I mean, we're talking about nice, developed, civilized countries where we have air conditioning and not that many people work outside. But think about swathes of the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, Africa, where they work in hellish conditions, and there's a lot of people who work outdoors. And so, in terms of the human and also economic and health system costs, that's perfectly clear that how the trend has gone. So it's not like, hey, it's just hot because it's summer.
It's very
so hot
interesting.
that it's really
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, it's very interesting because the way how I sort of framed this post, which is, I mean, one of the thousands of posts I've done, is to actually show two excerpts from two different newspapers. One was about the heat in Europe, and the other one was from Euronews about the banks investing more money, much more money than last after Paris climate agreement in fossil fuel extraction. It actually, the point is not the heat. The point is that we are continuing doing the wrong things with capital flows around the world. And this is not going to make things easier, I think, in the future, given the fact that we are facing some of the big physical challenges. I mean, one of them that I want to talk to you about is the droughts. And the droughts are currently worldwide pushing tens of millions towards starvation. There is a report just recently being published. Water shortages are hitting crops, energy, and health as a crisis gather pace amid climate breakdown. Drought is basically more than 90 million people in Eastern and Southeast Africa are facing extreme hunger after record-breaking drought across many of these areas. And yeah, and the situation has been years in the making. 1/6 of the population of Southern Africa need food and aid last August. And in countries like Zimbabwe, last year, corn crop was down 70% year on year, and basically 9,000 cattle died. I mean, these examples are just beginning of the worldwide catastrophe, as it says. I don't know if that expression is going to make people comfortable, but that's what it is. It's gathering pace, according to this report published on Wednesday, yesterday, and in the regions across the world. And I mean, given the heat we have right now, and physical consequences. This is not so much more about science. It's getting very physical for people around the world, and the most poor ones are paying the price. James, Italy and drought. I mean, I guess in parts of Europe we're going to see that too. What's the word in a place where you are?
Well, I mean, always with these things, sort of the media follows what's just happening in your own backyard and what's happening in your own moment of time. And in this moment, we had a wet winter, so no one's crying and complaining about it. But the long-term scenario is an enormous shift in water patterns because of climate change. Because, for example, the Alps have long served as a massive, water storage system for all the countries that live around it. And now the glaciers are melting. There's less snow in winter, so there's less storage. And basically, there's a problem, here of water just running away. And there needs to be a whole rethinking about how to capture water, how to use it more effectively, how to use it more judiciously, because it's becoming increasingly a precious resource. And we're stuck in old ways of working, right? We're stuck in, these things take years and decades for people to sort of rethink and then invest and find the money to, rebuild dams or water containment areas or change the way, water pipes just leak. And we need to kind of understand that that's a precious resource, but, politicians need to make those decisions now for future generations. I was kind of reading the interview that the EU Green Transition Commissioner gave this week to The Guardian, Teresa Ribera in Spanish. And she pinned it on political cowardice. So she kind of talking very much about what you were saying because she's Spanish, she was talking about the heat in southern Spain is very high, and also they have enormous water stress problems. And she was saying how it's sort of creating these costs on people and on systems, and the main problems, some political parties, she says, continue to insist quite vehemently that climate change does not exist, or else say that taking steps and making decisions to adapt to environmental realities is too expensive. And she says, I'm sorry, but it's much more expensive if we don't act.
Yes.
We all know that. We can't tell people that climate change is the great existential problem of our generation and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're not going to do anything about that." So it's very much a question of political will, and I think amongst the public, if you actually put it in a certain way, people understand the need to invest and the need to think about about the long term. It's, I think, perhaps the business lobby is pushing those political parties in that direction. So there's a question of lobbying, political capture,
Yes.
political short-sightedness that I think is very much to blame, and we really need to get out of that logic. I'm not quite sure how we can do that, but
No, but you're right. I mean, on a related note, I had a conversation with a bunch of people not so long ago about this particular issue of political cowardice, and they sort of normal people having normal jobs, not really related to sustainability in their sort of a day-to-day activities. They sort of 3 out of 4 in that discussion came back to me saying that it is actually our politicians. We really hope or expect politicians to act on this because we as individuals, we are sort of losing a faith in that our actions really in a systemic way can impact this. And all of them were actually relating this to quite obvious physical experience of changing climate through the weather, but also in terms of how they perceive the future will look like. I mean, some of these numbers that I'm thinking about in Spain, especially when you said that the article that was published about the EU, what is her name, Rivera or something like that.
yes,
I mean, Teresa, yeah. I mean, in Spain, if you look in Spain in particular, I mean, Spain has had a 50% fall in olive production, and that's basically driven by lack of rainfall, and has caused the olive oil to double in pricing. And Turkey is land degradation in Turkey has left 88% of the country at the risk of desertification in Turkey. And demands from agriculture in Turkey have emptied aquifers. I mean, Morocco has experienced 6 consecutive years of drought, leading to 57% of water deficit. I mean, these numbers are becoming quite, rough to play around because it is reality. And the question is, going back to what we were discussed earlier, what the politicians are going to do about this. It does not seem that politicians can have two things in the mind in the same time. Right now, it's all about security and defense and wars and everything, but we really need to look at what's going on in reality in this context, James.
Well, that said, I've got a question for you here, because this week we also had, I mean, just to stay in Europe for a second, and we're talking about political will. We had the European Commission standing by its 2040, 2050 long-term climate goals, and coming up with the 90% reduction in greenhouse gases emissions in 2040 compared to 1990, and setting this binding goal and then building on the existing 55% reduction by 2030. So the headlines seem very strong. There's a lot of language around flexibility and pragmatism. There's an openness also to allow countries to use to not just have domestic reductions, but also from 2036 carbon credits from non-EU countries account for up to 3% of the total reduction. But I also saw headlines about exempting heavy industry. Is this good news or bad news? Is it like going in the right direction, or is there sort of is the devil in the detail of how it's actually being laid out?
It's always devil in the detail, James. I think it's 2 steps back and 1 step forward. I mean, look, accepting the industry, heavy industry, and that industry will be allowed to claim compensation for exports funded by basically blocks carbon border tax in the new plans covering polluters. So what they're trying to do is somehow to both eat cake and have the cake. What I mean by that is that accepting the industry from this to make it more competitive on the global markets is actually, playing the card that lobby organization across the Europe have been pushing the Commission to do. In the same time, the target that is, as EU is communicating, quite aggressive, and it's sort of a still sending the right messages, I would say, to the businesses across Europe, is that this matters and this is something that EU is focusing on, is a good thing. What the outcome of this will be going forward, I mean, especially in current negotiations with the US and upcoming negotiations the US will have with other parts of the world, including Japan, remains to be seen. But I think in general, it's quite obvious that this, even the European Union, being as strong as they are on the commitment side, are having difficulties on a practical side actually to conduct this or actually execute on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's becoming a very important trade issue. Inside our borders, it's easy. It's
But
simpler
yes, as soon as you sort of a step outside the European Union, it becomes more complex, especially in relation to the US. I think this is the real sort of a consequence of the current American president's, I would say almost aggressive, sort of a, foreign economic policy conducted right now, where the EU has to sort of take steps to protect its sectors and businesses in that in the short term. In the long term, this is not going to be any big sort of a protection, because again, going back to what we just talked about, physical consequences of climate change are becoming more and more cumbersome. And I was also thinking about, how many flats and businesses in Milan have ACs, and who can afford air conditioning will be the big sort of a thing going forward. I think it's going to be a growing business, especially in Europe. Look, including in Northern Europe, where traditionally, as you know, the heat is not a big problem, but it's becoming a big problem, and you can clearly see that people are investing much more in air conditioning that they haven't ever done before. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got blackouts. I mean, there's some headlines just from yesterday in terms of rolling blackouts because the grid can't meet, in certain cities, can't meet the demand. And so even advanced economies have that problem in terms of putting enormous pressure on power demand. And, we've talked in the last few weeks about the enormous increase in demand for energy from artificial intelligence and data centers, but air conditioning is certainly going to be another one that's going to be very, very careful to watch, because it needs to be efficiently run and efficiently done. But also there's enormous need to, I think it was in France this week, I was reading about complaints in the parliament against the government, saying, we're behind other countries and we don't have enough AC in, public buildings and schools and all of these kind of things. So there's, all of these buildings and environments where there's lots of people. They need to, again, one of those things you need to start thinking about today, because it's going to take years to roll it out at that scale, and every year is going to get hotter and hotter.
And to enormous cost as well. Yeah, that's going to be a cost.
I always try and provoke people when they say it's hot. And I say, well, is this the hottest year of the last 25 years or the last 50 years? Or is this the coolest year of the next 25, 50 years? Because maybe when, we'll be looking back in 2040 doing our podcast and we'll say, hey, do you remember in 2025 when we thought it was hot and it wasn't, nothing compared to what we have now? Just think about how our kids are going to, what kind of environment they're going to have to live and work in. So that's my thought, goes out to the future as well, of what we're preparing for them.
I don't know exactly how they're going to be able to cope with this. We'll see. I mean, before we end this week, there is this report that came out on Monday, James. It's a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change, presenting the damning report to General Assembly in Geneva, arguing that the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, and other wealthy fossil fuel nations are legally obliged under international law to fully phase out oil, gas, and coal by 2030 and compensate communities for harms caused. This is this is a big thing. It did not get a big splash in the media at all. It sort of
No.
got buried down in a I guess the foreign and economic sort of a political debate. And what is actually states it's that states must ban fossil fuels ads and lobbying, criminalize greenwashing, misinformation, and misrepresentation by the fossil fuel industry, media, and advertising firms, and enforced harsh penalties for attack on climate advocates or facing a rise in malicious lawsuits, online harassment, and physical violence. I mean, this is a quite tough wording in terms of what needs to be done. And I completely subscribe to that. I think many of these things really need to happen. But again, going back to the politicians, it's probably not the focus is probably not there right now. And the question is, how do we change that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's depressing to see how little visibility it gets, but very interesting to read the actual report that was produced by Lisa Morgero, who's an Italian lawyer, and interesting for two things that I thought. I mean, one is I think it very eloquently connects all the different topics we've been talking about, rather than focusing on only the carbon story and only the emissions side to it, as if it's an environmental story or climate story. And she is the rapporteur on human rights in the context of climate change. So very much the human cost of climate change, which is very interesting to see, to read how that is illustrated in a very, very impactful way of framing it. And I think what she refers to is carbon tunnel vision. It's not just about that side. And in the headline even of the report, she talks not about decarbonization, but defossilizing economies. So she really points the finger at all of the multitude of problems that arise from fossil fuel industries and coal and oil and gas. So it's not just like, oh, if only, we could, which is the argument sometimes made, we could capture the carbon, then we could just carry on the way we already do with the technologies that exist. And she points the finger at saying, well, that would leave so many negative impacts on biodiversity, on people, on human rights generally, on conflict, that it's not enough to think, oh, if we just take the carbon out, then we'll be all right. It's like defossilizing our economies. We really got to step away from the pernicious effects of these industries, even though our economy has been built on it over the last decades and centuries. So yeah, it's a report to bookmark and to download and save, because I think it's a very important piece of work.
James, thank you for really making a good summary out of it. There's only one thing before we end, and that's the number of the fossil fuel subsidies globally. Removing these subsidies, which are reported at $1.4 trillion for OECD member countries and 48 other countries, would alone reduce global emissions by 10%. That's quite a lot. We have to think about things that are possible, and subsidies are probably one area where things could be done much faster. James, thank you very much for this week's One Step Ahead radio session. Thank you all for listening. Please share this and join us again in next week.
Thanks for the chat, Sasja. Thank you everyone for listening. And until next time, stay cool, stay well, and have a good weekend.
Many thanks. Bye-bye.